I'm going to give you a little introduction of the discussion and again kind of give you some scope of the things we'll talk about today. This is not a 101 session on blockchain. This is going to get deep into some of the things you've got to think about in order to be successful with blockchain. You know, how to pick the right use cases for blockchain, and also the other aspects. You know, how is it different from cryptocurrencies? We'll talk about that. But you know, what is blockchain? Blockchain is a digitized, decentralized ledger of transactions. And the transactions, you know, they can include almost any kind of data, right? And it's not limited to cryptocurrencies and tokens. You can think of cryptocurrencies and tokens as something you can layer on top of blockchain. But blockchain as a foundational layer can facilitate secure targeted exchange of healthcare data in a way that adds value to healthcare, helps improve the quality of care, helps reduce the cost of healthcare independent of cryptocurrencies and tokens. So I wanted to draw that differentiation right up front. You know, new transactions in blockchain are placed in chronological order. Transactions go in blocks, and the blocks are hashed. And a hash of a block includes a hash code of the previous block, so the hash codes are chained together. In this way, blockchain can maintain its immutability. Really the ability to enforce, protect the integrity of the data put on the blockchain and build trust. So each node of the blockchain network has a copy of this ledger. And the function of the nodes in the blockchain network is to ensure the validity and consistency of the ledgers across the nodes. Okay, so there is no middleman, there is no intermediary. Each of the nodes has a complete copy and they work together to maintain the consistency and validity. So one of the biggest things we get is how do you pick the right use cases for blockchain? And we'll talk a lot about that today because there's a lot of use cases out there that don't lend themselves well to blockchain, and then there's some use cases that do. You know, there's a lot of hype, and we're really going to try to help you find the ones that work well in your organization and with your healthcare network of organizations. Blockchain's all about the network. So near-term opportunities we see, and I actually want to step back and frame this a little bit. This whole panel in this session comes out of the HIMSS Blockchain Working Group. This is a panel of experts, over 50 experts from all walks of healthcare, provider, payer, pharmaceutical, life sciences, industry experts. And you know, they've come together to put this session together. So the information we're sharing with you today, the questions we'll ask, these are coming from the HIMSS Blockchain Working Group. If you'd like to know more about the working group after this session, please see us. But the near-term opportunities we see with blockchain are with existing B2B networks. Blockchain is about the network. Anybody can come up with a use case in blockchain. What's much harder is to build a network of organizations around that blockchain and to get them to trust blockchain and the network enough to share data. So those networks already exist, right, with existing B2B networks. Blockchain can be dropped in there in the near term, add value, prove itself out, and pave the way for revolutionary new use cases longer term. So what are some existing B2B networks? Clearinghouses, health information exchange, drug supply chains, provider credentialing, medical device tracking and tracing, public health, and the list goes on. You can also think of blockchain as a layered approach. So today at layer 0, we have healthcare data in silos. There's a lot of data in silos. There's a lot of opportunity to unlock that data to improve the quality of care, to reduce the cost of care by sharing in a targeted, secure manner. And blockchain can help with that. So blockchain's layer 1, facilitate the secure sharing of data. Layer 2, smart contracts, automate the blockchain. Blockchains can have executable code that can actually automate transactions. Then, you know, that can pave the way for cryptocurrencies and tokens. So the cryptocurrencies and tokens may or may not make sense depending on the use case. But they can play a valid role in incenting the sharing of data and, you know, can drive sort of economy on top of blockchain. The last thing I'll mention is, you know, the top layer above that even, AI machine learning, right? These are very data hungry applications. They need lots and lots of data. They need high quality data. If you limit the data going into AI machine learning to only the data you have from within one silo, you will get limited benefit from AI machine learning. But if you can get data from across a network, from all the silos, you can greatly enhance the benefits we get out of AI machine learning and analytics. And blockchain can facilitate that secure targeted sharing and the discovery and location of that data. So those are the layers. The key factors we're going to talk about: identity and interoperability, privacy, security, compliance, performance, throughput, and scalability. integration. You know, we see blockchain augmenting enterprise systems, not replacing in the near term. And so it's about integrating blockchains with enterprise systems. And we'll talk about deployment. Where do you put those blockchain nodes? Is it in your DMZ on-prem? Is it in the cloud? There's lots of options, right? So we'll talk about those things to get you started. But I'm going to pause there for a moment and give each of the panelists just 1 or 2 minutes to expand on the introduction and share some of their specific thoughts on blockchain. Mike, why don't you give us...
Sure. So my title is Senior Distinguished Engineer, which doesn't really describe what I actually do. I alternatively use blockchain evangelist or benevolent overlord of all things blockchain. And the idea is that I'm facilitating a very large corporate capability of appropriately using this technology to help improve healthcare. We've been looking at blockchain for about 2 years, and we're very happy to announce that we are going beyond prototyping and creating an alliance with multiple payers and providers, including Quest Diagnostics, Humana, MultiPlan, and United Healthcare, and Optum, to actually make some of the blockchain value a reality.
Thank you, Mike. Ted, do you want to give us some thoughts?
Yeah, so co-founder, CTO of PocketDoc, we've been very methodical about how we're approaching this problem. First, we are the business, we are the operating system for the business of health, period, full stop. So we've done everything to do shop, book, and pay. We want to bring one-click third-party services to the health industry, and we started off with bringing APIs to the industry, searching, clearinghouse functionality, cash prices, EMR integrations, etc. And now we have all of our smart APIs as function of smart contracts. About 2 years ago, we did the very first eligibility check live on Ethereum, and now we're running, we're the first company to run full stack with hardware consensus and mechanics and smart contracts on the secure enclave and Sawtooth. One of the things that whatever you call blockchain, we know that provable consensus with secure agents as a function of the network will be the future of seamless distributed healthcare.
Thank you, David. I'm Corey Tadaro with Hashed Health. Hashed Health coordinates and works with healthcare enterprises. We help enterprises define their blockchain use cases and their overall enterprise strategy for approaching this technology. And then we help convene networks and build blockchain solutions for those networks around a variety of different use cases. I think what's really different about this year as opposed to last year, talking about blockchain last year, it was very new for the industry and there was a lot of talk about let's put X on the blockchain. This year we're getting a lot more nuance, not only about the technical design, but to echo David's point about a network, we have to articulate the business value for all of those enterprises coordinating together and sharing infrastructure. And I think that's much harder often than the technical design, designing transactional sets and node distributions, but to articulate business values for enterprises which are normally competitors or at least colleagues in a transactional set. To share that infrastructure is the real challenge, but I think that's where most of the value is going to lie in the coming year and going forward.
Thanks. So I'm Emily Vaughn. I am the blockchain product director at Change Healthcare. I recently joined the company to lead our blockchain product across all of the lines of business that we currently maintain. And so you may be aware that we announced a blockchain implementation on Hyperledger Fabric earlier this year that's integrated with our claims network that's running our insurance claims. And that was a very first step in what we see as a very long-term vision for this technology. Blockchain is a big word, but the technology does a very specific thing. Blockchains are event logs that run in the back end of systems. And when we talk about the potential for blockchain technology, we're not just talking about those logs, we're talking about the ecosystem of interrelated technologies. And that's when you start getting into smart contracts, identity management. There's quite a bit of development still to take place. And as others have mentioned, really the focus of this market for the past year has been providing network infrastructure. And I think today we're going to learn a little bit more about how that network infrastructure will be adopted and what the phases of development will be.
All right, great. Thanks very much. Some great thoughts and context. And again, I want to encourage you to record your questions down. We're going to leave at least 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. But I wanted to kick off a sort of panel discussion here just to expand on our thoughts and recommendations in getting you going with blockchain, seeing beyond the hype. I wanted to start with a question to Mike. Mike, how's blockchain different from Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in your view?
Yeah, so Bitcoin was the first what's called cryptocurrency or virtual currencies, and the idea was that to create a peer-to-peer financial capability without intermediaries. And since the Bitcoin release in 2008, there's been nearly 1,000 other cryptocurrencies created. And these cryptocurrencies have all the characteristics of a currency, but without a central bank. They have many of the characteristics of a commodity like gold, but without the physical asset. And they have many of the characteristics of equity like a stock, but there's no company behind it. But people still find value in the exchange and storing value using a cryptocurrency. In order to make that a secure and trusted environment, even though you may not know who you're trading with, a technology platform is required, and that's where blockchain comes into play. And this is the level 0 that you were referring to earlier, is that blockchain provides that secure and trusted environment. In a public blockchain, it's an anonymous, completely transparent kind of activity for the trading of the cryptocurrencies. So that's the distinction, is cryptocurrencies run on top of the blockchain.
Makes sense. Anyone want to expand on that? Or?
Yeah, that was a great synopsis. If you're looking, the way I usually say it is Bitcoin is not blockchain, and if you're looking for cryptocurrency suggestions in the market, go somewhere else. Blockchain is going to be, whatever it ends up being, is going to be the next evolution of enterprise computing. And there's going to be crypto assets have been around for about 25 years. Smart contracts have been around since about 1994. But the conglomeration and the aggregation of secure distributed computing with encryption mechanics and now secure enclaves, the timing is now for that.
I think that this is a topic that is really confusing for a lot of people. And in the past year, we've seen a lot of ICOs come online, a lot of healthcare companies raising money using tokens. And I think that the difference between a token and a cryptocurrency is probably worth stating. When you think about the Bitcoin cryptocurrency, Bitcoin is the token that incentivizes everyone to run the Bitcoin network. It's the mechanism of value that the network operators use to stay in consensus with each other. A lot of the healthcare applications, for example, that we've seen that are looking at tokens may not be dealing with network level consensus balancing. They're thinking about incentive in an application. How do you incentivize a patient with a token? And so I think that there is a big difference between a network level cryptocurrency and an application token. And you could have an application token that runs on top of a blockchain that doesn't use a cryptocurrency. Like you could think of the Hyperledger Fabric as a protocol that doesn't use cryptocurrency. You could still design an application on top of that uses a token. And I just think that that's a distinction worth making.
Yeah, just real quick, Emily, those are awesome points. We created the first crypto asset framework on Hyperledger Sawtooth, specifically to your comments. So there's going to be application level. We have about 600 plus third-party applications running on our platform now, and we see variances from large hospital systems, payers. We have about 95% coverage, but what we're seeing the variance in is exactly what Emily brought up, like application incentive versus network incentive, and we'll get into it, but it's all locked to the identity of either the provider, health provider, or the consumer. And it's really important to have the minting functions reflect the incentive models.
I'll just add finally, what I think we can learn from cryptocurrencies is how to balance economics and take economics to scale. And what concerns me about tokenization of incentive is that it's a unidirectional value flow. And what we see on cryptocurrencies are, well, hopefully balanced economies where we have value moving in multiple directions at once. And so articulating to my earlier point about balancing the business value for the network participants, it's not about unidirectional flow of value or incentive. It's about also the benefit that the other party is going to receive. And if we're going to start tokenizing and making these incentives liquid, then we really need to think about economics and how to balance that economy so that it doesn't tilt or collapse, which I think is very possible when you have that unidirectional flow. So I think what I take from cryptocurrencies is how to bring exchange incentives to normal healthcare business processes, and then how to balance those exchanges and those economies and take them to scale.
Those are some great thoughts, and just a closing remark, I think, there's a lot of hype and speculation around Bitcoin right now, and unfortunately a lot of people sort of equate Bitcoin to blockchain. We hope one of the things you'll take away from this session, based on the input you've got from this panel of experts, is how can you help your organization, your C-level, your board understand how is blockchain different, right? Because we want blockchain to live on. It has fantastic value beyond the cryptocurrency, but definitely the cryptocurrencies and tokens add value in specific use cases. So switching gears, I wanted to do the next question and direct this one at Ted first. Ted, will blockchain replace or augment existing systems, and how does it fit in and add value?
So one of the things that, at least the way we view it at PocketDoc, especially with how we built out the operating system for the business side, is that APIs are not rip and replace. And unless something is completely broken, and that's the choice that you make, we believe that is a side-by-side performance metric. One of the things that when we enter into the enterprise agreements with these companies is, let's say from an identity management perspective, we say, what is your probability of accuracy for your identity solution today? And we compare that to our identity by consensus solution in side-by-side metrics. So it is not a rip and replace, it is a comparison, and almost like a swivel seat. Like when a doctor is out of network for a hospital, they have this swivel seat scheduling opportunity. What we see is the ability to augment these existing enterprises and essentially add a accelerant to it, if you will. And eventually we see disintermediation happening. And I'll be very candid here that we have the highest CAQH level 4 clearinghouse in the nation. We see as far as closing the AR window down to a day or less, we see the impediment of clearinghouses and in cases EMR as being a huge impediment to closing down those behavioral economics you guys bring up. And we see eventually that part disintermediating. So right now, it's going to be augment and accelerate, but eventually we see disintermediate.
So yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting that, and I think Change Healthcare is a large company that that has multiple layers of service that we're providing. At one level, we're doing a lot of the network infrastructure. We have a clearinghouse business that manages 2/3 of all of the U.S. healthcare claims. So that's a really big infrastructure. What we see, and to Corey's point about creating customer value, is that today blockchains will augment processes. They'll exist in parallel, and this will provide a safe path to transition some of the administrative capabilities that happen today in a centralized way to a distributed and shared environment, and that process is going to be a transition that's really dictated by the business value that's being unlocked. So when you think about the use cases that provide a lot of value today, where a blockchain could come in and exist as an add-on feature, there's a lot of compliance and administrative use cases for auditing and reporting, the data sharing and other types of compliance regulated processes And there's a very easy path for building a blockchain application based on that today. And then that really creates a framework for the future in which the identities and the data assets that you're tracking in an administrative workflow, that sets you up for a future state where you could be doing a completely novel approach to application development where the blockchain is your base, not the database. So I think that in today's world, we're going to see a coexistence, and even 20 years from now, you're still going to need your cloud providers, your private databases. Blockchains are just a logging feature that helps applications stay in sync with each other. So you still need application software, you still need identity management solutions, and those will all exist off of the blockchain, and they will leverage the shared record of truth that the blockchain provides so that they can communicate with the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah, so just to add to both your comments were referring to augmenting existing systems, and just to take that one step further, I think that trying to replace existing systems today would be fairly difficult with the blockchain. Mm-hmm. Augmentation or even the introduction of new capabilities and new marketplace ideas is also a very short-term possibility. One example would be around the sharing of provider demographics or credentialing or those kinds of things where payers traditionally haven't really cooperated in that endeavor, but this is a new area that the technology will enable them to actually collaborate.
Yeah, I'll be very blatant and say if you need sub-millisecond arbitrage in your applications, you don't need blockchain. It's an interesting issue because it's an interesting opportunity because for the first time in history we can step back and I believe a long time ago I said we can give the healthcare system a mulligan here, and 80% of the rules that we see processed is in SQL stored procedures. So we can take those rules out and experiment with new business models and ensconce them in smart contracts and have a base lingua franca for everybody to communicate these new business models with on the network.
Yeah. I'll just add finally, what we're doing at Hashed Health is we're looking at the integration with blockchain with the existing stack, as everyone mentioned, whether that's Mongo or Redis or other types of functions and features. But we're looking forward to re-architecting some business process. What blockchain allows us to do is really embrace a resource event agent model, where we're looking at the blockchain as an event source, and we're looking at the way contracts in healthcare can be really emergent properties from these various event source streams that blockchains can contribute to. So while we are integrating, you're never going to replace your entire stack simply with a blockchain. It doesn't hold that much data. It's not that fast. If you need millisecond arbitrage, God forbid, or maybe that would be a great problem to have in healthcare, but nowhere nearby. But the opportunity to start rethinking how we construct solution sets utilizing blockchain and business flows, and really seeing that these artifacts that we're working with now, whether that's contract or credential artifacts, are really emergent from a stream of events from multiple intermediaries and multiple parties. And that's where I think blockchain provides a new path forward. We're going to see the re-architecture of the stack, integrating blockchain into it.
Great points. Switching gears, Emily, a question for you. How do you approach the business model process and cultural challenges to enable success with blockchain?
Yeah, so that's the business model for blockchain, right, is a big question that gets asked. And I think it's important to understand that when you're approaching how do I get business value out of this technology, to consider what the technology actually is. A blockchain is a network. It's a protocol that lives at the very bottom of a stack. And so if you are a company looking to develop blockchain technology today, you have to kind of consider what your role is in this ecosystem as the technology continues to develop. So, as you mentioned earlier, there's layers to the technology, and the business model for using blockchain is going to vary depending on what level you're using it at. So I like to start with the bottom. You have your network level infrastructure, that's the blockchain. On top of that, you'll have your middleware, your application services, and this is what allows your private applications to communicate with the blockchain without revealing all of its data. So the middleware is a very healthy feature for abstracting data and recording it onto the blockchain. Then you have your application level that sits on top of that. Most healthcare organizations are going to be application end users. They're going to be using apps that leverage blockchain data, their private data sets. And then the layer above that, you have services that are doing analytics. And those analytics services can read app data, they can read blockchain data, they can read data that's outside of this workflow. And so depending on who you are, your business model and the value that you're getting out of this technology is going to be very different. And I would take it a step further and say that the market right now is an infrastructure market. We're dealing a lot with network development. How can we improve the core capabilities of blockchain technology so it can power AI and machine learning and all the wonderful things, automation, secure automation between companies. I mean, that's the promise. So I think that that we're starting to see some valuable use cases, especially around provider data management and claims management, that are emerging as sort of the first use cases for this technology. And I think that that will help most healthcare organizations understand the value of blockchain to their business, where past conversations that might have been a little more esoteric.
Yeah, so I'll follow up on that. We created yet another alliance. We have about 54 companies in the DocChain Alliance. Come one, come all, get in touch with us. And the 4 use cases that we're looking at, by far, identity by consensus. I cannot emphasize the people in this room. At some point, we all have companies that interact with each other. That is a function of consensus and coming to a business agreement. The second use case is autonomous auto adjudication, closing that AR window down to a day with either eligibility or claims. The third use case is supply chain management, both in pharma and medical diagnostics. So provenance of the machine, provenance of the drug, distribution of the drug, distribution of the machine. And then the fourth use case is pre-authorization. It was very interesting. I was on the panel at JP Morgan W2O panel with the chief medical officer of et cetera, and I started off with pre-authorization, and he stopped me and he said, Ted, if you solve pre-auth, we can all go home and everybody clap. So we're very focused on tactical use cases. There's other companies that are working with us for things like real-time underwriting for life insurance, et cetera. But we see the business model application as a function of the consensus being hugely important. And identity by consensus, which I'm sure we're going to get into, is to me the spearhead which drives everything else, both on the provider side as well as the consumer side.
I just want to add to the original question had to do with the cultural challenges around adopting. And I'd say that while the technology issues are a challenge, I think the social issues are probably even more challenging. And what I mean by that is that since the blockchain value proposition is largely going to be realized when multiple companies are involved, many of which may be competitors, the real challenge here is getting this compelling use case together that carefully balances the economic benefits of everybody involved and brings about a sense of trust in the group in creating an alliance.
Creating the trust network. Yep.
That's the real social or cultural challenge, is getting that trust network together.
And I would just add to that that another I guess component of the cultural challenges in dealing with such a cutting edge technology like this, when you're talking to I guess maybe the average market, is that healthcare is a very heavily vended space. A lot of the ultimate beneficiaries of blockchain technology are going to be individuals who are using applications that have been developed for them. And so I think that culturally it can be difficult because we're trying to talk about a very complex technical concept with users who don't want to have all the complexities really explained to them. They just want things to be better, faster, and more secure. And so I think that when we approach these innovative ideas, it's important to remember that that as technologists, we get really excited about things, but the real benefit to our customers is making it seamless for them to use.
Well, let me just add one final thing. Well, maybe Ted will follow up. I'm going to throw a little sourness into this. I think if you want a thumbnail sketch of the business value of blockchain, it's shared state of a multi-party process. So all the multiple parties in real time can share the state of that process instead of what we do in healthcare now, which is mostly reconciliation. They shoot me their EDI, I do my thing to it, I shoot it to someone else, maybe the link breaks somewhere in the middle. But with blockchain, we can all share that state. But that's the rub. Frankly, a lot of healthcare value is achieved by controlling the network and introducing opacity and obfuscation into the system. Right? Whether you're a health system, whether you're a payer, whether you're a distributor, that's simply the fact, and that's the way we do business now. So I've been in many conversations when I'm talking about we can make payment faster and more transparent, and I honestly get the question back, why on earth would I want to do that? Right? It's not in my interest to make that fast. That 60-day float works wonderfully for me or for anyone else. So how can we articulate business value? I think the initial use cases will be away from those kind of crucial pain points for every, depending on who the player is. There's always a line I can't cross that's too core to their business when I talk about blockchain solutions. But there's a lot of surrounding ones that we can start to work on now, and people can start to realize the value, and then maybe we can move towards some of those core issues. But I'm under no illusion that suddenly payers and health systems are going to become purely altruistic and give up their control over some key network play or key transparency issue that's core to their revenue in the status quo.
Yeah, so I don't think that was a wet blanket at all. I think it's an adversarial network trying to create transparency and social capital for the consumer, and that was an extremely complex statement what I just said. And I'll throw a wet blanket on this. 15 billion faxes last year. Think about that. And this next spec, Mike, is not on you. $375 billion in paper wasted by the payers in 2015. HIMSS in 2016 did a cybersecurity report. 35 to 40% of all data is unencrypted. And it's interesting, IDC Insights said that 84% people send, 89% people receive paper faxes. So that's the reality. That's what we're having to deal with. That's why I think it's an augment and accelerate, and to everybody's points.
Excellent points, and definitely we're cutting through the hype here. These are real down-to-earth issues, with culture and process and so forth, so thank you for that. Switching gears, Mike, could you tell us what criteria should you use to decide whether and how to use blockchain?
Well, I think a lot of these points have already been covered, but really the one-liner that I like to share with executives in understanding the value proposition is that blockchain is most valuable when independent organizations want to share common information and use that information and smart contracts to automate mutually beneficial processes. And so today we have islands, and the model is, as Corey mentioned, islands and reconciliation. So the kinds of criteria for use cases would be, where do you have islands, and where do you have expensive reconciliation, and where do you want to accelerate those processes? And so some of the hints that you should look at is, do you have a contract even between the organizations? Even if it's a large organization and have inter-segment agreements, that's kind of a hint that you might want to be sharing information and on a blockchain. And that if multiple parties are contributing to that information and also sharing that information, that's another tip. We faced this question quite a bit, and we have summarized some of our knowledge in understanding how to apply blockchain to a particular business problem. And so if you go to, this is a small advertisement, if you go to tinyurl.com/blockchain4me, with the number 4, blockchain for me, you'll see there is an online survey that asks you questions about the business problem and tries to provide you some guidance about whether a blockchain makes sense in that scenario or not.
Okay, excellent. And we've just got a few minutes. I promised you we would have 15 minutes for your Q&A at the end, so warm up those questions. We're going to start with those. But real quick, Ted, are you any other thoughts to share on what are the problems your organization or the client organization, if you're a blockchain solution provider, ought to solve or considering solving with blockchain? So really some more perspective on helping people frame up what are the right use cases for blockchain.
Yeah, I think that the one overarching, as I've already said, is identity by consensus. Who is Jane Doe? Know your customer across the board, and that is a multi-party endeavor now. We have seen enough data that given external data from social networks, internal data from claims, one-click payment processes, the personal health record is going to be decomposed down to about a 500-dimension vector in the future. But we see the overarching aspects being identity by consensus as a function of context, because you essentially have a continuum. You have an immutable ledger from the time you're born. You get a social security number, then you get a bank account to learn how to budget, then you get a stock brokerage account, health ID, and then hopefully a long time in the future you get a death certificate. But there's context with that. It's a gradient. So hopefully later tonight, when you're somewhere else around in Vegas, you want to be 21, the ability to pay an anonymous. But if I do something too outlandish, I have to go to the Las Vegas hospital, and I want the immutable ledger to completely show all the data about me because I have a high fever. So there's context associated with that know your customer. One of the things that we find interesting that Corey mentioned about throughput is I'm always questioned about the throughput of the blockchain. Well, 20 billion transactions, which is about, I guess, and I'll throw this out to the panel, but 20 to 30 billion transactions is around 600 to 700 transactions per second. But the that's 600 to 700 transactions per second I could knock out with 20 billion transactions per year. The reality is my throughput is 90 to 180 days, right? And so the throughput of, let's say, an operations research problem in a hospital is asymmetric to actually what we deal with from a real throughput of computing the contract. So the two things that I would ask is go figure out identity by consensus and understand what a secure enclave for securing your data can do for your company.
Excellent. And we're just about at the 15-minute mark, but I wanted to give you some sort of provocative thoughts on the security, privacy, compliance side. You know, sometimes I hear, you know, folks, I'll ask them, why are you looking at blockchain? They'll say, I want to secure my data. And blockchain introduces some really good aspects in terms of protecting data, in particular the immutability, being able to detect if data is being meddled with or deleted. It's very easy detectable with blockchain, and so it doesn't propagate, so it's essentially immutable. Blockchain also, because it's decentralized, it protects the availability of the overall network, but there's a lot of additional things you got to do to make sure the availability of the network to your organization is in place. Also, confidentiality with blockchain, there's some additional things you got to do there in terms of private consortium, permissioned, type of encryption, access control. So don't take security, privacy, compliance with blockchain for granted. There's a lot you have to do to make sure you check those boxes when you're implementing your blockchain use case. So with that, I wanted to open it up for questions in the audience. And do we have a mic that we can pass? Excellent. Over. All right.
Thank you. This is Reese Morgan with CubeChain. This is a question for the entire panel. With all the issues surrounding a private and a permissions-based blockchain, how does the panel see any emergence of a public-based, HIPAA-compliant blockchain that can be used by different parties?
I take that. So thanks for the question, Reese. And for those that may have not heard it, Reese was asking about the transition from a private to a permission to a public ledger. And today, Change Healthcare has in production a private blockchain that's running on 6 nodes. This is based on the Hyperledger Fabric protocol. And what we've learned building our own private network is optimizing for throughput, as has been mentioned, is how can we make the network faster? And the next phase of development is to look at a permissioned model where you can have a group of companies, an alliance of companies who are providing a path to transition piloted or private applications into a shared environment. But the biggest challenge when you think about a truly public and permissionless blockchain for healthcare is that decentralized consensus is what slows down the network. So if we need a public blockchain for healthcare that is HIPAA compliant, that is capable of doing real-time transactions, the decentralized consensus is going to be a mechanism that has to be solved for. And today there's really only one way to achieve decentralized consensus that we know of, and that's Bitcoin mining. And I don't think that mining in healthcare really makes sense when we're talking about data volumes that are huge. So one thing that Change Healthcare believes, and I'm sure that you guys have opinions on this as well, is that it's actually the responsibility of us and other companies who have been providing network infrastructure to healthcare to look at an open source model and to try to solve for these problems so that we can provide this as a utility, as an infrastructure to the entire industry, and it's not controlled by one company. So that's a big challenge, and I think that the best place to explore that is going to be in an open community.
Yeah, I'll just say that I agree. Permission change for the enterprise is where everything starts. We provide, as a function of our smart contracts and APIs, when you build on top of our platform, the results of the identity by consensus from the enterprise, permission enterprise, the crypto asset framework, and then all of our other APIs with smart contracts, which is going to flow through to the public chain. There's going to be the hybridization of the permission to public is going to be through payment clearing.
Yeah.
And so I think in the near term, that's going to be the aspect. The great thing about a permission chain, Intel's on the panel up here. We're using right now. We're using proof of elapsed time consensus mechanics, which is essentially a lottery system, and gets rid of a lot of the Byzantine fault tolerance issues. But also we see, for those in the audience interested, we see consensus mechanics and consensus algorithms being a part of that hybridization.
I would just say that from technical basis, it's probably possible now to do a public HIPAA compliant chain. Mm-hmm. But from a cultural perspective, my compliance officer would tell you where you can go and what you can do with that blockchain. Yep. We're not going to do that. Yep. I don't care. I don't care what the math. Right. I will say that it all depends on the use case. Finally, Hashed Health is showing at our booth a new payment engine called Bramble outside the claims infrastructure that does utilize the public chain. But its role is primarily as a trust layer and not for data storage. So you're never really pulling data back off that public chain. So you have to articulate why you're using the public chain and what role it serves in the overall solution set. That I think that's where the conversation has to get to.
Right, excellent points. Let's switch gears to the next question.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Very valuable information. So I'm Krish from CSRA. So I have a question about the legal hurdles you faced, because especially in the claims processing or prior authorization use cases, right? What were the legal challenges you faced, right? Because you have multiple stakeholders or multiple parties that you want to involve and solve. There are a lot of legal aspects to it. So can you share some thoughts and issues?
Sure.
Ted, do you want to take that?
You can't, David just said it, you can't skip the compliances and security mechanics. SOC 2, INAC, CAQH, you have to have those locked down before you enter into the enterprise. And as far as legal hurdles, we have seen that that's reduced the friction in getting something stood up, because we have worked very closely with, whether or not it's AWS, Azure, or a cloud vendor, but we've also worked very closely to get those compliances and security mechanics in place.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add is, as part of establishment of an alliance, some of the legal considerations here is what to do with confidentiality, especially when you're dealing with competitors, as well as what the intellectual property agreement would be in terms of who owns the intellectual property. Many times the alliances will form a third party separate from the participating parties that house some of those rights. So those are the kinds of considerations.
And I just thought about something. The whole concept of computable governance is a very foreign concept. So, we are pushing for computable governance, but once again, to Mike's points, it starts with the alliances and agreeing on first order variables.
Yeah, and I would also add, if you're looking at how should I legally approach a blockchain application or a blockchain network, consider the technology. Consider your blockchain vendors. There's hundreds of blockchain protocols. There's thousands of cryptocurrencies now. So if you want to use any of those as the platform that you want to build your app on, it definitely requires the due diligence of what licenses is this open source technology based in, because that may impact whether or not you can even take that into production in enterprise healthcare.
All right, excellent. I think we've got more questions. One in the front here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Satrupa Bose. So I'm wondering where all these blockchain networks are going to live. Do you see blockchain networks on the public cloud as well as in private enterprises behind firewall? And then if you have two alliances that are one on the public cloud, one on the private cloud, how will they interact with each other?
I can answer that. Well, we're going to see both. Chain interoperability is an emerging field, has been for about 1.5 years now. How do transactions on one chain, how can they speak to transactions on other chains? And I think we're going to see a lot more of that come up, where instead of there being one network, we may get there, but it might take a long time. We're going to see a lot of communication between chains. We work on the public cloud now. We can do on-prem. We can do behind the firewall. It's not different fundamentally from a lot of distributed computing that you do now. So it's not a fundamentally new deployment, if you will.
Yeah, if you go to AWS, you can we can do a one-click deploy with node validation in about 2 hours, full stack, and this includes IPFS, sawtooth layer, and example smart contracts. But I've been tracking the Interledger protocol, which everybody on here knows. So it's going to be networks of networks, and once again, that is extremely powerful. That's why I keep coming back to the consensus aspect.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts to that. So blockchain is very much a foundational technology. So just like the internet runs on all different kinds of hardware, some cloud, some on-prem, you're going to see a great variety of deployment models for blockchain, and necessarily it's a very low-level sort of foundational infrastructure component. The other thing I think was implicit in your question is, if we create these sort of islands of blockchain,
right,
are we missing values between those islands? And so, as the panel said, there's some really exciting research. Side chains is one of the things going on. We didn't talk a whole lot about interoperability, and we should, because this is the interoperability showcase. So interoperability is not to be taken for granted with blockchain, right? There's a lot you got to do to ensure interoperability with the blockchain. The good news is there's fantastic work that's gone into FHIR, F-H-I-R, and other things that can be layered on top of blockchain. So if you're starting your blockchain, don't assume interoperability. Blockchain gives you an opportunity, a catalyst, maybe a forcing function to do the interoperability, but leverage all of the existing work with FHIR and other standards to bootstrap your blockchain efforts.
Yeah, and Emily brought up have your organization get their head around open source software. Yeah. That's just not, that's going to be a showstopper if they want a managed code base.
Agreed. Do we have time? I think we have time for another question. There's one in the back on the right.
Would you guys recommend, when you're talking about identity and healthcare claims and stuff, storing those digital assets actually like encrypted on the blockchain? Or would that be sort of like a pointer to passing on to another way you would access that information?
I think there's a variety of possible use cases. It depends on the data. Yeah. When we talk about storing on the blockchain, for some use cases we need to make a distinction between storage for future retrieval or storage for future cross-checking or checksumming or other types of functions and features. I never want to store to retrieve. I don't think blockchains are a really good database for both read and write. It's really append only. and we append for certain specific features and functions. But I'm always sensitive about what data hits the chain, because they're distributed, and if it's distributed, it's fundamentally immutable. So before you cross that line, you want to be really good on your data model for what's hitting the chain.
Yeah, those were great points. We look at it, the way we're doing identity by consensus with context is we're operating about 4 billion entities right now, and we key each identity provider. We shard our key on the network. And so the key functionality is stored on the network, but the transactions from the identity providers are stored distributed and append only. Okay.
All right, excellent.
Yeah.
And we might have time for just one more. We're going to call it? Okay, gotcha. So I wanted to thank the panelists. Just a fantastic discussion today. So much insight. And thank you very much to the audience for joining us today. Fantastic turnout. We see several layers of people standing at the back. Thank you for enduring that. And please come and see us afterwards if you have questions we couldn't get to. And look up the HIMSS Blockchain Working Group if you're interested.